This land is easily the worst Skylanders level in creation.
That's a funny way to say troll home security, but okay.
Um,
Why did we invite you back?
This is Chill Bill coming at you live from K-Troll, here to introduce another exciting episode of Skylanders Portalcasters, the podcast discussing anything and everything Skylanders. Over to you, Ditto.
Thank you, Chill Bill, for that amazing introduction. And welcome, everyone, to Season 3 of Skylanders Portalcasters. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. I am joined today by my co-host, Trioxen, and by guest star and former co-host Inklander to discuss dungeon crawlers and platformers in regards to the Skylanders franchise. How are you both feeling about this topic today?
Personally, I feel really good about this topic. I feel like Skylanders kind of became its own thing, a mix of dungeon crawling and platforming, more so than anything else.
yeah, I mean, I'm excited to talk about this. Granted, I thought you all got rid of me in the previous episode, but I'm back as promised to make a guest appearance to help pass the torch over to the new co-host here. But yeah, I mean, I like both forms that Skylanders took, but I definitely do have a preference of one over the other, which we will dive into throughout this episode, I'm sure.
Yes, we will. Alright, so let's start out with the origins of the series. Not counting the 3DS, if you look at strictly the console releases, and I believe the PC release for Spyro's Adventure, the franchise started as purely a dungeon crawler genre of game. And it kind of expanded from there. In the third installment, Swap Force, they decided to add in platforming. The 3DS versions of the games always had platforming from the start. Vicarious was no nonsense about it. They just dropped the platforming in right from the get-go. And so the 3DS versions of the first 4 games were all platforming dungeon crawlers. Whereas the console versions, as I stated, wouldn't receive that treatment until Swap Force, the third game. So the first 2, Spyro's Adventure and Giants, were purely dungeon crawlers. Let's start with you, Oxen. What is your take on the first 2 games and the style of just pure dungeon crawler that they were?
For some background, I started the series with Spyro's Adventure when it first came out, and then picked up Giants the next year. And I really liked the format because I've been quite familiar with dungeon crawlers in the past. I like Gauntlet, and I can't remember for the life of me what it's called, but it was one for the PC. Basically like Dungeons and Dragons, but a video game. And I enjoyed the format, but personally, I always felt that Skylanders was, at least with the first 2 games, it was definitely a dungeon crawler first, but then they really tried hard to throw in platformer elements without being too much of a platformer, because obviously you can't jump. That's probably the biggest factor. But they really tried to throw in features that helped it become more than just a dungeon crawler, which I think kind of made it its own thing, and I believe was better for it.
That is true. We noticed examples of this earlier in this podcast when we discussed Troll Home Security. That was one level where it really tried to shine through as trying to be a platformer, but without actually being a platformer.
Yeah, Darklight Crypt as well, which we discussed. That one also had very similarly platformer elements while it was still a dungeon crawler by having those bounce pads in.
Especially in the quantity that they were in.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Those levels definitely stood out as being more platformer based. But for me personally, I really like the way that the franchise began. I have always really liked the dungeon crawler genre with, Gauntlet and Diablo and all of those different, really well-known and popular dungeon crawlers. And so when I was able to see some of that stuff in Skylanders, I thought it was really, really cool. And so, especially because they allow you to jump in certain places, it almost adds to the puzzle element by making jumping seem more of like an event, by having that be more of like a physical, like, not necessarily item in the world, but like an action that can only happen with the bounce pads or with like the teleporters or the super bounce pads. Like, that was a pretty interesting mechanic, and I think oftentimes by not including the jumping, they had to come up with some really clever puzzles and some clever level design in order to be able to continue to give verticality to these levels while not having jumping as like a primary thing, especially when in later games, like especially like with Swap Force, when they introduced jumping for the first time, the jumping controls in that game are pretty stiff to me. Like, there are a lot of times where you try to make a jump and it just doesn't work, and we know from talking with the developers during the 10th anniversary that they were concerned with that. They were concerned about the accessibility, and having to add jumping into that would make that harder for certain players, and also that it would make coding the levels themselves a lot more difficult. And I think that that's definitely something that was seen in Swap Force, is that the jumping in that was pretty stiff. I do think that it got a lot better in the later games, but it was definitely something that the series had to experiment with over time. And so, honestly, I think the dungeon crawler idea that the game started with gave the franchise its own really cool aesthetic and its own almost unique kind of Diablo-light gameplay aesthetic and gameplay genre that in many ways I think once they added in the platforming, it did kind of lose a bit over time. So for me personally, I really enjoy the dungeon crawler elements of the games probably a lot more than with the platforming. It's not that I think the platforming was necessarily bad, and I definitely think it improved over time, but I do think that some of the initial spark, because I got introduced to the series with Giants, that the franchise had by being a dungeon crawler was definitely lost over time.
See, and I don't feel that it really lost anything when platforming was added, personally, because it still very much plays and feels like a dungeon crawler, but it's a hybrid dungeon crawler and platformer, which throughout the first two games, it really put on display that that's what it wanted to be, with the verticality of all the level designs. So, from my perspective, nothing really was lost and only ever gained as the series moved forward. And when it comes to dungeon crawlers themselves, from my perspective, in my opinion, Spyro's Adventure and Giants, they were good games, but when stood up against other dungeon crawlers, like, for example, Diablo or Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, those two games are dungeon crawlers that focused a lot more heavily on the RPG aspects, which, yes, Skylanders had some of that, but there wasn't really a big focus on it at all. Whereas those two dungeon crawlers had a lot of focus on the RPG elements that go along with it, and that's what made them unique and feel the way that they feel when you play them. Another big comparison that can be made is obviously with Gauntlet. Dark Legacy was, in my opinion, the perfect dungeon crawler. Or the perfect example of a dungeon crawler, anyway. But when you play Gauntlet and then you play Spyro's Adventure, they have very different feels to them, because Spyro's Adventure, in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, feels like it wants to be a platformer, but isn't, whereas with Gauntlet, it's strictly very much within the walls provided by just purely dungeon crawler, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. See, I think And here's where I'm going to take the sort of probably the more or less interesting approach, but the middle of the road that Skylanders was, at least in my opinion, it was trying its best to be both a dungeon crawler, for the target audience, especially to children, as well as include those platforming elements. So you could kind of say that's a dungeon platformer or a plat crawler, whatever you want to go with. And that there's debate on how much success. Like, should they have taken more RPG elements from a dungeon crawler and incorporate that into your characters, or should they have we know from the developer interviews their opinions on the jumping, but even should they have included jumping as a base thing from the beginning, so it's more platformer feel. Regardless, in my opinion, I think that including jumping later on added, I wouldn't say it necessarily took away from the dungeon crawling experience. It just added a new layer of how you interact with the world. So it added a little bit, like you have that no more jump pads. You just have verticality at access. Combat plays out differently because now you can evade via jumping. And then as far as the puzzle aspects of the game, including jumping, I have opinions on how well they integrated jumping into puzzles into the later games after Giants. But by including jumping into the later series of the games, at least as terms of puzzles, I feel like it took them a while to learn how to include jumping in a meaningful way to create puzzles that would actually be somewhat complex or somewhat challenging later on. Because I feel like in Swap Force, it's, there's a different level curves. Sometimes they feel easy, and sometimes they feel just a mess because the jumping wasn't quite fine-tuned yet. But I feel like later down the line they kind of found that balance between dungeon crawling and platforming.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that, where I do think that Swap Force was where the biggest issues were with the Switch. And with the addition of jumping, I do think that by the time we hit Trap Team and Superchargers, I think they finally fixed it. Imaginators, at least to me, does have some pretty bad jumping puzzles still, for some reason, but overall that game is relatively fine as well. But yeah, it did take them a while to be able to introduce jumping in a relatively meaningful way. That is, of course, except on the 3DS. Vicarious Visions did seem to just go full on into platformer right away on 3DS, and I think that was honestly to those games' benefits, because those games really knew what they wanted to do right away, and it just worked. That even had double jumping, and that was pretty cool. And so that was pretty good. The Skylanders games on 3DS did actually turn out pretty good when it came to just the platformer side of things. But still, when it comes to the actual gameplay mechanics, I do believe that a lot of the puzzles felt more creative because they had to be more creative with the dungeon crawler side of things than with when they made the switch to platformer. Granted, as you said, yeah, the jumping does add in some more interesting ideas for combat as well. And in that case, it does make you wonder whether initially they should have had more interesting ideas when it came to skill trees and everything for Skylanders themselves. But overall, that is primarily where I feel like jumping maybe added the most. Was we already had the verticality with jump pads in the dungeon crawler whenever they did want it. And so the jumping really, if anything, especially in Trap Team, once they added jump attacks, that's where they started to have a little bit more complexity with causing it to be a platformer. But otherwise, I feel when they were in the dungeon crawling side of things, they were actually way more invested in the puzzles that they were creating because they had to make them a little bit more unique. Because I feel like they had to make them a little more unique because they were trying to kind of include some platformer elements while still trying to keep it as a dungeon crawler, which meant that progression due to puzzles had to be a little bit more complicated, which I do think overall made a lot of the puzzles more interesting and more fun.
I agree.
I can agree with some of the points that have been made here. For example, the jumping not being perfected in Swap Force when it was first implemented. For the most part, I don't have an issue with the platforming mechanics in Swap Force, but there are some points that, especially when I'm speedrunning, they really do shine through. Some jumps that just, no matter what I do, are not consistent, and I can't consistently successfully clear them. And I think the overall experience is benefited for me by the fact that I started with Trap Team, where the jumping was more properly implemented and integrated, because that's kind of what got me hooked into the series. And then from there, going back to replay games like Swap Force, well, the jumping doesn't feel nearly as refined as I would have been used to from Trap Team, or even more recent games, because I didn't go back and play Swap Force until after Imaginators was out. But it would have felt less like this was a poorly integrated mechanic, and more like, okay, this is what it was before it came to be, Trap Team. It was just not as easily handleable, but it didn't seem like out of place either, because it had already been there from my experience. So I think that's really the benefit in favor of platforming that I get, is because I started so late in the franchise, it doesn't feel as out of place. It doesn't feel like something that the developers didn't want to add in to begin with. It felt natural. And I feel like if I had started with Spyro's Adventure... Now, I've stated before that if I had started with Spyro's Adventure or Giants on console, I wouldn't be the fan I am now. But if I had started with Spyro's Adventure or Giants, as opposed to starting in Trap Team, I would have noticed a lot more of the jankiness with the platforming controls, I'm sure. Because I have come to notice a lot more of it over the years as it is, as I said, especially during speedruns. But it just doesn't bother me as much as it might have if I had been there for the shift.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like, the developers have also talked about how they had done polls and whatnot about, oh, well, what if we decided to, like, remove jumping or whatever, and, like, all the, like, fans during testing were like, no, don't remove it, and that it was, like, hyped up for Swap Force during the reveal of Swap Force, that, like, this was something that fans had wanted for a long time, was, like, the ability to jump. So it's definitely, I do believe, a preference thing, It's like, if you grew up on dungeon crawlers and you really like dungeon crawlers, then, that's what you're going to be drawn to the most, and that's definitely what drew me into Skylanders. But, if you are more interested in platformers, then, yeah, the first two Skylanders games, at least on console, might not necessarily be your thing, but definitely the later games might be a little bit more so. That, and also the ones on the 3DS.
See, and I find that interesting because growing up, I enjoyed both platformers and dungeon crawlers. I've brought them up a couple of times already. I didn't play Diablo until way more recently, but Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, which is basically like D&D Diablo, and Gauntlet Legends and Gauntlet Dark Legacy, those were big titles in my life growing up, but so were games like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, as well as like Super Mario. So I grew up on both, and I really enjoyed both, but when it comes to, as I stated earlier, Spyro's Adventure and Giants just don't feel the same to play as either of those dungeon crawlers. And I think that's what draws me away from those two games and more towards the rest of the series, is because when I got into Trap Team, I would describe it to people as Spyro meets Gauntlet. And that just seemed like the perfect mashup of genres. And looking back at how Spyro's Adventure and Giants did implement a lot of verticality via jump pads and sort of had a platformer-ish like feel to it, that and the fact that my GameStop, for whatever reason, had Skylanders marked as a platformer from the get-go, probably some kind of confusion when it came to console versus 3DS, because the 3DS ones were platformers. And those, honestly, if I had started with Spyro's Adventure, the 3DS probably would have been where I started because I was primarily into mobile, like on the go, gaming on my way to work and whatnot. And that would have been a really interesting experience to have had for the first experience as well. But I wouldn't go so far as to say it depends on whether you prefer dungeon crawlers or platformers as a whole, because they feel different from other games in the genre because of how they're styled. So I'm not sure why, but I tend to gravitate more towards the Gauntlet meets Spyro than I do the doesn't feel quite dungeon crawlery games.
Yeah, that's interesting, because for me, that's one of the things that I feel makes the first two Skylanders games really unique, is that they are dungeon crawlers, but they don't feel like a typical dungeon crawler game. And, like, yeah, they don't have as many of the RPG elements related to them, but, you know, I feel like they have some pretty interesting lore building, and I feel like they have a whole interesting idea with the Toys to Life, and the mass number of different characters that you're able to play as, not just like one or two, but a bunch. And I like how they came up with some interesting puzzles and puzzle ideas from the first two games, because oftentimes whenever you have a dungeon crawler kind of game, you have like collectibles and you have battle gates, and that is usually effectively it, more or less. There might be some other things in there, but I really like how not only did Skylanders have those battle gates, but they also had a lot more world-based puzzles that could lead you off into secret paths and have you really think about what you're trying to do to be able to progress forward through the levels. And I really like that about the original Skylanders games. I think that's something that was really cool and helped differentiate them from other dungeon crawlers, but in a really good way.
Yeah, I feel that even with the lack of jumping, because I mean, like, jumping is almost the most base thing you can do typically in a lot of video games. I mean, outside of most dungeon crawlers and everything like that, but, like, you know, Mario, it's the first thing you can do, and pretty much the only thing you can do is jump, you know? And having grown up on the Sonic the Hedgehog series for the Genesis back in the day, like, jumping was your form of exploration in the world. There was a lot of verticality to, you know, different platforms, secret platforms in that game. So at least in my experience, jumping was your access to explore the world. And I feel like in a lot of games where you don't have immediate access to jumping, I've always kind of generally felt like, oh, you know, that's really cool, like, little platform up there, you know, with some NPCs. I wish I could get up there, but my character can't, unfortunately. Which is, like, as you mentioned, Inklander, with the first two Skylanders games, they had really creative ideas for exploration. You know, like, I can't remember what level it is, but in Spyro's Adventure, there's a little area, and it's not a water gate even, but there's just, like, a little stream that characters that aren't water, or Double Trouble or Stump Smash in particular, they can't cross, but if you have a water Skylander, you can get there. Stump Smash can float across, or Double Trouble can float. And just little things like that to find the little secret areas and little nooks just really scratched a really big exploration itch I have for most of my video games.
Yeah.
So I really do, yeah, I give a lot of credit to the first two games for finding ways around limiting how you can explore the game without jumping.
Yeah, and we even look at more modern dungeon crawlers, ones that have been released in the past couple of years, like Hades. And while Hades is really good, I like it, it's a lot of fun, it does still fit that very typical dungeon crawler kind of formula. It still puts its own twist on it, but it doesn't try to do that world traversal kind of magic or have those world-based puzzles in the same way that Skylanders does. So in many ways, I do feel like Skylanders not only fit the dungeon crawler genre, but also tried to make a lot of interesting changes and cool ideas to try to do something different within the genre and maybe try to push it forward a bit.
That definitely sounds like it could be the case. I personally didn't get that vibe from it, that feel from it, but I could definitely see your point there.
But what do you think? Do you prefer dungeon crawlers or do you prefer platformers? And how do you feel Skylanders did as a franchise in both mediums? Let us know in the comments, and we'll be happy to see what you have to say.
And while we're at it, why don't we also find out what our good buddy Hugo thinks about platforming versus dungeon crawlers? I see he appears to be on his way over here now, and that means it's probably time to dive into our brand new segment, Hugo's Handbook.
All right, so Hugo has just passed us his handbook, and he's helping us flip through the pages. And let's flick that out here. There's a little beetle in between the pages, and another one. Oh, there's a lot of beetles, and they all seem to be coming from this page. Oh, that makes sense. Dunebug. On today's episode of Hugo's Handbook, we'll be discussing Dunebug. For all of us who are new to this segment, Hugo's Handbook, we'll be reviewing a Skylander per episode, and we'll be rating them on a scale of 1 to 7. So, Inklander, how do you feel about Dunebug?
How do I feel about Dunebug? Dunebug is one of the worst Skylanders in existence.
Tell me how you really feel.
I do not like his design. I do not like his attacks. I don't like anything about this character at all. I believe his attacks are fairly terrible in terms of just attack power. I do not like how when he's like hovering and also trying to shoot, he's having to point in one direction. That is just like really frustrating. No. I don't really like anything about this character at all. I mean, I've said that usually the Swap Force and Superchargers lineups I'm not as big of a fan of, but, you know, usually there's like a couple that are like really, really awesome out of those lineups, like Splat and Stormblade and Roller Brawl and Washbuckler that I really like. But this is like bottom of the barrel. I really don't like Dunebug at all.
And how about you, Ditto? What are your thoughts on Dunebug?
My thoughts on Dunebug are quite in opposition to Inklander's. I really don't think there's anything Dunebug doesn't do fairly well. Would I say he's one of the best Swap Force Skylanders? Not necessarily, but he's pretty well up there. I really enjoyed his design. I thought it was actually really creative. It was something I never anticipated seeing. The first time I actually laid eyes on one, I found one brand new at the GameStop when I was picking up my Blackout and Spotlight. I had made a trip, like, way out of the way just to get those two, because they had them on hand. And I see out of the corner of my eye, I see this metallic paint job on a Skylander, and immediately my attention was grabbed, and I was like, what is this? I go over to get a closer look at it, and it's Dunebug, and like, everything about his design, I just thoroughly enjoyed. It was something that I would say exceeded my expectations for a Skylander at that point in time.
Okay, fine. I'll give him 1 point in the positive. He gave the dark element its color scheme. That's it.
As far as his gameplay goes, I also found that his moveset, like his abilities, were They felt really inspired to me. They were unique. They were different from anything any other Skylander I had experienced played like. Just the ability to create this magical orb that would obviously represent, you know, the ball of dung. A dung beetle rolls around, but it's this magical glowing orb that you can then roll around at enemies to deal damage, and they can even get stuck to it, and you can continue rolling them through even more enemies at that point. It was a really, really cool thing. And he has, like, from his staff, he gets basically like a magic missile spell. And it's just, overall, it was really, really cool.
Yeah, I'm going to have to say ditto to you, Ditto. Because Dunebug is personally one of my top 3 favorite Skylanders. Which is probably in direct opposition to Inklander's opinion. But that's okay. Pretty much a lot of what you said really rings true for me too. Like the first time I saw Dunebug, he stood out. That, his paint job, and I'm personally a really big fan of insects, and having only really one other insect Skylander prior to being Swarm, I was like, oh, I have to get this. And the fact that he's like a little itty bitty cute little beetle with, the shiny paint job, I was just, yes, day one, have to get this guy. And then for me, like, to be fair, he does feel like he starts off slow, like in terms of how much fun you can get out of his gameplay, like right off the get-go. But as he's, you progress and get more upgrades, especially with his Dune Ball and upgrading that is just, it's so much fun in Swap Force when you can just roll up a bunch of Cyclops and roll them right off the edge. And then just you keep doing that over and over, and it's just like almost a little bit of Katamari Damacy. And then just his ability to fly and shoot sparks out his back, so he has a little bit of defense from the rear. And then even his soul gem being able to summon a little buggy buddy, which to me is very adorable, and I love that. It's just, he's a great character. I guess one of my only other complaints would be to say, to be fair, is that on his Dune Mage path, having him lose all that vivid color that he has and replace him entirely in gold, I feel like was not the best decision there. But, I mean, to each their own, right?
Right, and on that note, I think one of the reasons I'm actually more drawn to Dunebug is the whole, you can roll up just a ball of Cyclopses and drop them off the edge. I seem to be drawn more towards characters that do have the ability to just dunk enemies off the edge. As a speedrunner especially, it's quick, it's effective, it gets them out of the way so I can keep going. That's one of the things with Magna Charge, is with his attack 3, he just picks up an enemy, hit it again, throw him off the edge. End of story, they're not in the way anymore. Even some of the more powerful enemies just aren't even a threat anymore that way. And Dunebug has that same ability. And also, on top of having the ability to throw an enemy, just throw enemies off the edge, or yeet them into the hole, as is the case in some of the arenas in Swap Force, he also has a minion, the little bug you mentioned that comes with his soul gem, and so having all of that actually makes him feel a little more powerful than one would anticipate.
Absolutely. Yep. He is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of Skylanders.
Wow. Okay.
Was that a convincing argument for you, Inklander?
No.
Have we won you over?
No, it's not. My score on this character is going to be the lowest it can possibly be. The Buggy Buddy Soul Gem, we've seen plenty of characters already by this point that have, like, doubles or whatever. It's not very exciting to me, so that's, like, just, like, a not really unique kind of mechanic there. That, and also he has some really low base attack stats and also speed stats, and so yes, while his attacks might be unique in style, even after getting upgrades, unless you're, like, hovering in the air where he gets, like, a little bit faster, like, his base attacks, no matter what path he's on, just don't feel powerful enough to me to be able to clear out enemies as effectively as this character could. Like, yes, like, he does seem to have some interesting, like, abilities when it comes to, like, trapping enemies with the Dune Ball, but even then, like, it's not anywhere close to the abilities that Magna Charge has as a character. Like, Magna Charge has that ability and also has incredibly higher base stats. And so because of that, this character is just kind of duplicating, in many ways, some other ideas that other characters have. And while some of his other ideas, like the Dune Ball, seems unique, it is also still very similar to Magna Charge's ability. And that and his attacks are just... his attack stats and his speed stats are just not particularly exciting. I've just not ever been able to connect with this character. Like, I usually like a character that's really able to get in there and take out a lot of enemies really fast, and this character just isn't able to do it to me in a really quick manner. It might be creative. It might, look cool when it comes to the actual attacks themselves, but in terms of just like pure enjoyment and like feeling like I'm really powerful when I'm playing as this character, it just doesn't happen for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally valid. So, Inklander, what rank would you give Dunebug?
I would give Dunebug the incredible score of 1 out of 7. If this was golf, he would be doing great, but this is not golf.
Yeah, that's a shame. Ditto.
For me, I would say I would rank Dunebug a 5 out of 7.
Right on. And then for myself, I would rank Dunebug a 6 out of 7. He's not entirely perfect, but he is pretty darn close to me. And he's close to my heart. So with all our scores totaled up, our official Hugo's Handbook rating of Dunebug is 4 out of 7. He is perfectly middle of the road.
I can feel fairly satisfied with that.
So as we close that chapter of Hugo's Handbook, we notice that Flynn is waving at us from the Dread Yacht. And who's that flying? Oh, look, it's Tessa and Whiskers. Oh, they're beckoning for us too. Huh, they must need us urgently. Let's go over and board the Dread Yacht.
Currently aboard the Dread Yacht, we are crashing through some trees and making a very, very fast landing in this heavily forested area. It seems we were needed quite urgently because one of the native creatures is in danger of being poached. But we've managed to land safely, despite Flynn's piloting skills, and have touched down in this small meadow. Anybody see any crazy nuts hanging out around here?
Hey, I'm right here,
Well, I mean, that's all well and good, but I kind of meant boingo nuts.
Oh, are we in the Phoenix Sanctuary?
Yes, because in today's Dread Yacht Destinations tour, we will be exploring the Phoenix Sanctuary from Skylanders Trap Team. Now, the Phoenix Sanctuary is the first part of the Chef Pepperjack arc in Trap Team, where Chef Pepperjack is hunting the, I believe, legendary Phoenix chicken to make an omelet. And the Skylanders have been called in to put a stop to his dastardly plans. This level features actually quite a lot in the way of mechanics. It's got the boingo nuts, it's got the bounce pads, it's got battle gates, and it's got an arena at the end. And it's also the appearance of the one, the only Chill Bill. And this is the lead up to the Chef Zeppelin, which would be where we go to handle Chef Pepperjack and bring his arc to a close. But first, the imminent threat, right here in Phoenix Sanctuary. Inklander, why don't you start us off? Your thoughts on the level?
So, unlike my opinion on Dunebug, I actually really like Phoenix Sanctuary. I think it's probably one of my favorite levels in Trap Team. I feel like all the jokes in this are pretty well written. I think Alex Ness is just on par in this, not only because he voices Chill Bill, but he also voices one of the trolls in the Shredknot as well. So not only that, but also just like the writing and the whole plot, the jokes about like, onion and the ice cream, everything like that. It's just like, it's the typical like Skylander stuff, but I think it's played up in a really great way. The environment art for this level I think is really good. I like the ambience of it. There's a lot of good music in this one, which is also pretty ambient as well, which I really appreciate. The Rainflower Grotto theme in particular is really good. There's just a lot about this level that I really, really like, and in many ways it kind of introduces the bridge mechanic in Trap Team, granted in a more simplistic way than what we see in Rainfish Riviera. But, overall, like, I think it's pretty good. I like the arena fight at the end, which, it's always fun when we have a level that ends with an arena fight. And just overall, like, the lead up to it, the eggs that you kind of have to avoid as you're, like, trying to walk up to the arena itself, I think was just, like, really, really cool, like, touch to the level. There's just a lot going on. It's really just like a nice, ambient, well-designed level, at least aesthetically. I do think that gameplay-wise, it's also pretty fun, too. It has a little mix of everything. Some puzzles, some boss fights, and an arena battle at the end. And it also progresses the plot forward in a pretty great way. So overall, I actually really like this level a lot.
And Trioxen, what are your thoughts on the level?
I actually really like this level too. I'm with Inklander in that the aesthetics of it really hit a lot of good notes for me. As far as Skylanders games go, my rule of thumb is like, if I feel like I could just hang out here and enjoy a day out, I think it's a good level. In Phoenix Sanctuary, I could see myself spending like a week there. I really love the vibrancy of it. It brought me back to Spyro's Adventure Forest levels. Just they're a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more saturation. Having the birds everywhere, the little wildlife to add to the feel that it's lived in is a huge thing for me. And even just like the variety of mechanics throughout that level in particular, to kind of mix it up so doesn't necessarily feel one note. That was a big factor.
It's also worth noting that this was one of the first levels that we saw of Trap Team as well. We saw the tail end of Chompy Mountain at the initial Trap Team reveal, and we also saw the first half of Phoenix Sanctuary as well. So this level also has a nice place in my heart as well, because this was like the level that introduced me to Trap Team pretty much. So that's another reason why I like it. It's just nice nostalgic memories.
Yeah, absolutely. And like probably maybe too much on my end. Nostalgic feelings of nostalgia really bring me a lot of joy out of Skylanders. Yeah, and as well as this level, it introducing Chill Bill as your capturable villain, as well as Cuckoo Clocker, who I quite enjoy. I think that has that really going for it. Yeah, no, in general, it's a very beautiful level. I could see myself setting up a shack there and living with the Phoenixes till the end of my days.
Yeah, it's like really well done. The like environment artists did a fantastic job here. They really did.
When it comes to the aesthetic and the vibe of this level, I'm right there with you both. The aesthetic is amazing. It's very serene. I enjoy the birds with the boingo nuts. That mechanic is cool, and the kind of lore behind that with how you toss a boingo nut and they're all over it, like kind of explains to you what the wildlife in this area eats, and that's used as a way to progress the level. And of course, the introduction of Chill Bill was great here. Chill Bill being one of our favorite villains for sure. And when it comes to Cuckoo Clocker, I'm kind of neutral. Cuckoo Clocker is a really cool design. I've always kind of enjoyed him. And then for the other capturable villain for this level, we have the Shredknot. Oh boy, the Shredknot.
I can only wonder what problems you have with that villain.
Yeah, okay, so my biggest issue with the Shredknot, specifically the Shredknot Battlegate, is from a speedrunning perspective, you have to get the timing right, because you have to use the delayed trap trick in order to not soft lock your run once you hit that Shredknot Battlegate, because if you use the regular trap trick, nothing spawns afterward and that Battlegate never opens. And this was a roadblock for me for a while, until the delayed trap trick became a thing, and then even still afterwards, I occasionally forget that Shredknot's delayed, and I get locked out, and it's just the most frustrating thing. So I don't really like the Shredknot encounter because it's more complicated than the others, from a speedrunning perspective. And then there's the arena at the end, Well, I enjoy Chef Pepperjack's little quips, especially the one-liners like the onion in the ice cream. I believe his most iconic line. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to that arena, and we'll see this with a lot of areas throughout different levels of different Skylanders games, but the spawn rate is inconsistent. Specifically, the timing of it. You could finish up with like every enemy on the field right from the get-go. You can clear them out in like 6 or 7 seconds easily, and then sometimes the next wave of them, or not wave because it's separated into waves, but you know what I mean. The next heat of enemies will spawn sometimes immediately, and sometimes you gotta wait like 35 seconds for them to spawn more in. And it's completely inconsistent, and it's wildly maddening. But this is the one level, or one of the few levels in Trap Team where it's really, really noticeable. And even before I was a speedrunner, I was noticing the variable lag on that, and wondering why that might be a thing. But it's very prominent here, and I would say that takes away from the level experience for me in this case. Outside of those two things, I got no complaints. It's a great level.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. I've definitely been sitting around probably 30 seconds wondering what I did wrong in that nest at the end.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that is very true. It does take a while sometimes for them to spawn more enemies there, and it can be incredibly inconsistent. And I can understand how, from a speedrunning perspective, that can be annoying. And also the same thing with the Shredknot as well. That can similarly be annoying, where if you don't get the timing right on pulling out the trap, it will just break the game and end your entire run.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's that's just it. Overall, a great level, but it's got its flaws.
Yeah, very true.
And aside from sitting there in the nest wondering, did I accidentally manage to find another glitch that was going to soft lock this game? It's aside from that, it's a good experience. And from a casual playthrough perspective, it's probably one of the better levels in Trap Team. I would say it's definitely top 3.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is easily, I believe, not factoring in all the speedrunning stuff, easily, I think it's one of the best levels in Trap Team. They did great when it came to gameplay and aesthetics on this one. And story, too. And characters. So, yeah, they really did a good job across board.
So now that we've chased Chef Pepperjack out of the region, the area's relatively safe, our buddy Brock over at the arena has requested that we bring him a couple of Boingo nuts, so I think we're going to grab a couple of those and head on over to make a delivery.
So as we head into the arena, carrying our baskets of Boingo nuts, we look around and Brock isn't really anywhere to be seen. Where is he? Suddenly, a gate opens at the other end of the arena, and a large silhouette with 4 arms comes approaching. Well, it looks like in today's Brock's Baddies, we're going to be taking an intimate look at the Cactopus. So the Cactopus are cactus monster enemies. They first appeared in Skylanders Imaginators. They generally attack by slamming their bodies on the ground, which creates a shockwave of cactus needles that erupt from the ground. When they're not attacking, you generally see them run around flailing their arms in the air, like they just don't care.
Very aptly described.
Thanks. I really enjoy Cactopus just because of his mannerisms, and he just seems incredibly silly. He doesn't even look like he wants to attack. He's just there for a good time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, this is something that we actually talked to Jeff Murchie about in the 10th anniversary podcast, where we just had to ask him about Cactopus. Like he's such a fun character design. He is just like, he's really lovable, you know, like you kind of want to have like a plushie of him or something that you can put on your desk, you know. Like he's just like a really, really cool design. I really like him. His personality is fantastic, and while he's maybe not necessarily the hardest enemy to fight, I do have to say that just like whenever you encounter a Cactopus in Skylanders Imaginators, it always brings a smile to my face anyway. Just the amount of personality and just how good the pun is and everything just really, really makes that character something special to me.
I was on the exact same wavelength as you when you mentioned that it would be nice to have a little plushie of Cactopus, because yeah, he just looks like he would be a very lovable plush to, you know, just have with you and flail his arms around like in the game. And generally, as far as like character design, to me, he just has a nice unique silhouette, you know, and he's generally like simple, like he's not overcomplicated. He's a Cactopus. He's got 4 arms. He's got 4 eyes. He's got a little flower on his head, and you know, and he's also got a little belly button, which I don't know. Personally, that adds the actual cuteness factor to him for me.
Yeah.
So 2 out of 3 people on this podcast would hug a cactus. Confirmed. Let's ask James from Pokemon how that turns out.
We know he would do it again.
Oh yeah. He loved that thing. But all in all, I would say you're both onto some really good points. Cactopus is a like really well designed, really lovable creature. Honestly, it doesn't feel like it's trying to fight you ever, except when you actually have to deal with one. And from both the perspective of a speedrunner and somebody who plays in nightmare difficulty, when you have to deal with a Cactopus, it's never an exciting experience. It's one of those things that you'd really rather avoid it if you could, because they have a boatload of health. They take forever to take down compared to anything else around them.
I mean, it's fair. Like, they are definitely more on the barbarian level. I do think the barbarians are a little bit more intimidating. But the only time where I ever feel like a Cactopus is particularly threatening is in the arenas, in Imaginators. Like, in Enchanted Elven Forest, I don't really think that they're that bad, because usually they're a little bit more spread out. But if you have a Cactopus in the arena and you have a bunch of other enemies in there, and say you're maybe not using a Sensei or an Imaginator and you're using literally any other character, that Cactopus is going to cause a lot of trouble. But otherwise, I think that usually they're pretty easy depending on like all other circumstances. I just think, you know, if you're in the arena, you're having trouble taking out enemies, and you're like not using a Skylander that has like an insane amount of damage, then yeah, they definitely could cause some problems.
Yeah, they're definitely a lot less intimidating than a barbarian, because unlike a barbarian, the Cactopus doesn't hit like a runaway ice cream truck. The Cactopus is... its primary traits for combat are its massive health pool. The biggest thing there is that they slow you down. If you have to deal with them and you can't just run past and leave them behind and not worry about them, if you're playing on an easier difficulty, everything around you dies in one hit, typically speaking. Cactopus takes 3 or 4. It's just a bit of a slowdown that from a speedrunning perspective would be just bad enough to be annoying.
Ah, yes, gotcha. But they are at least not bark demons.
Oh, yes.
Right. But like when in a group of enemies in an arena-like setting or a battle gate, that's when they actually become threatening, because they can set off those shockwaves while you're distracted, dealing with something else. Or if you're on a higher difficulty, they also hit harder, and they take even longer to wipe out. So in like a battle gate or arena scenario, they can be really, really imposing at that point in time. Otherwise, like in a normal casual setting, I still don't like dealing with them because they're actually cute. And I feel bad, because I know they're not actually trying to harm me. They're just kind of living their best life.
Yeah, there's always a party going on in their hearts. Fortunately, you got to crash it.
They remind me a lot of Wii Fit Trainer from Smash Brothers. They're not actively fighting you. They're just going about their routine.
It's because they have all that cactus juice, you know. It's the quenchiest.
Oh, solid reference.
I can't disagree.
All right, gang. So on a scale of 1 to 7, how would you feel you would rank the Cactopus? Inklander?
This one's pretty hard because I think it kind of depends on the circumstances when it comes to them for gameplay, as we talked about a lot. Overall, the design itself is easily a 7 out of 7, but I'm not quite sure if that's the same when it comes to gameplay itself. So I think I'm going to say 6 out of 7 here.
Fair assessment. Ditto?
Honestly, the Cactopus, it's really well designed. My grievances with it are actually relatively minor. It's literally just that they slow you down a bit. That's really all I've got against it. They're a lot of fun. They're well designed. I don't dislike seeing them when they show up for the most part, and the majority of them are skippable, I believe. So, just like Inklander, I think I'd rate this a 6 out of 7.
All right. And yeah, for Cactopus for me, as you know, I really love Cactopus generally. But to balance out with gameplay-wise, he doesn't really do much for me. You know, he's there. He's causing havoc just because he's having a good time. But yeah, he's neither an oh no moment or a oh yes moment in terms of fighting. So I would have to rank Cactopus. I think he's going to have a 6 out of 7 for me. So for this Brock Batty segment, Cactopus is ranked at a 6 out of 7. Now with Cactopus all taken care of, there's just the 3 of us still in this arena. And the band is still playing. I think they want us to fight.
As the lights go up and our portals activate as though we are meant to use them to summon a Skylander, we prepare for the Archean Arena, where we pit Skylander against Skylander in a bout of theoretical combat. In today's arena battle, it looks like we are going to be doing a 3 Portal Master free-for-all. So let's begin with our guest star, Inklander. Who are you summoning to champion for you today?
Okay, well, I figured because it's the Valentines episode, I kind of had to bring Love Potion Pop Fizz into the arena.
Okay.
Ooh.
That's a very interesting choice. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about Love Potion Pop Fizz.
Yeah, so Love Potion Pop Fizz is of the magic element and has ranged attacks with a health of 810, critical hit of 60, armor 31, speed 42, and luck of 28. His primary attack is Potion Lob, which deals 40 damage. His secondary attack is Beast Form, which deals 48 damage. And his tertiary attack is New Concoction, which deals 0 damage, but is letting him swap between different potions that can do different types of damage. His top path is Best of the Beast, where Beast Form drains slower, recharges faster, and gains a third attack. And his bottom path is Mad Scientist, where the potions gain increased damage and effects, more potion effects, and attack 1 gains charge for 3 potions.
Love Potion Pop Fizz is sounding like quite the contender. My personal experiences with Pop Fizz are that he's actually really a lot more powerful than one might expect. A lot more reliable, especially in an arena-type setting. So I feel like Inklander's chosen a really, really good champion today, and I'm interested to see where this battle goes. Trioxen, who have you chosen to champion for you in today's bout?
Well, this being my inaugural episode, I had to make sure I had to represent my absolute favorite boy, Hyper Beam Prison Break.
Ooh.
Once you said favorite, I knew who you were going to pick.
It was that easy.
Yep.
Hyper Beam Prison Break is a Series 3 Skylander. He is of the Earth element. He has a health of 870, critical hit of 54, armor of 39. speed of 32, and a luck of 28. His attack 1 is an energy beam, which does 34 damage. Attack 2 is he summons a crystal shard, which does 55 damage. Attack 3 is his classic crystal eruption, which does 50 damage. And then his top path is Crystallier, where his crystal eruption gains an area of effect and increased damage. His attack 2 summons 3 shards, and he has increased resistance with the wonderful crystal shell on his back. And then his bottom path is Prismancer, where his attack 1 gains range and increased damage, and it splits into 3 directions when refracting. So yeah, I had to pick Prism Break, and normally I would probably pick Series 2 Prism Break, but I felt I still had to give him maybe a bit more of a competitive edge with the Hyper Beam.
Prism Break is also a rather nice contender here. Very unexpected from my end. Inklander seems to have called it instantly, but I did not actually see that one coming. Prism Break is a very nice choice, very solid, well-rounded Skylander, and as we came to learn during the 10th anniversary discussions, was the baseline go-to for the developers for just about everything. Now I'm really, really interested to see how this battle's going to go as I summon my champion. I have chosen to fight for me today Solar Flare Aurora.
Oh no.
Solar Flare Aurora is a light element melee Skylander with the lowest health total here at 720 at a max level of 20, with critical hit 95, armor 50, speed of 80, and luck of 31. Her attack 1 is Double Sword Strike, which is a combo of very, very speedy sword attacks that deal 49 points of damage per hit. Her attack 2 is called Flash Dash, which allows her to dash and flip through enemies, dealing 39 points of damage per hit. And her attack 3 is Light Burst, which drops a sword of light in the ground, kind of like a trap, setting up an area of effect that slows enemies, and explodes for 98 points of damage. In the way of upgrade paths, her top path is called a Chemo Master, and what it does is it adds combos, rapid strike, and increases her attack speed. And her bottom path is known as Fastest Skylander Alive, which provides her attack 2 with a continuous dash, increases the damage of her attack 1, her sword attack, and allows for her to use attack 3 and drop those light swords while she is dashing. So, Solar Flare Aurora is a really, really speedy fighter. I'm interested to see how she's going to match up against Love Potion Pop Fizz and Hyper Beam Prism Break, because her primary trait is, as her bottom path implies, she is the fastest Skylander alive. And I'm hoping that I can capitalize on that and maybe come out on top.
Yeah, so Solar Flare Aurora is definitely, I think, going to be a bit of a problem because she is the fastest Skylander alive. You know, she's got double the blade, so double the slash. So, you know, it's definitely concerning, I think, especially for Pop Fizz and Prism Break. I do think that this might end up having to be a situation where the not Sensei Skylanders might have to team up for a bit to be able to take Solar Flare Aurora out and then try to fight from there, because Solar Flare Aurora has that massive critical hit, has some fairly decent attack stats, but that speed is going to be pretty insane, and is going to be a major part of determining who's going to be winning this.
Yeah, I have a hard time picturing any kind of instance of Prism Break being able to take Aurora on his own without being decimated right off the bat.
Yeah, Prism Break has some good attacks, but they are definitely a whole lot slower than Aurora's, and pretty much same thing with Pop Fizz as well. Pop Fizz, I'm going to be having to deal with those potion attacks and being able to figure out what potions are going to be important to use when. Otherwise, yeah, it's like I'm going to want to try to stay away from Solar Flare Aurora as much as possible, so I'm probably going to be using those, like, tracking potions, the ones that, like, are the buddies or whatnot, or, like, the ones that are going to be putting down that toxic goo to be able to try to keep a little bit more of a distance and try to deal some damage that way as Pop Fizz. And luckily, though, Prism Break does have some beam attacks and also has that really good area of effect attack that might be able to help deal with Solar Flare Aurora, maybe more than Pop Fizz.
Yeah, when I'm thinking, I think that for either Pop Fizz or Prism Break to have a chance, like you said, we would need to team up. Prism Break can definitely lay down multiple crystals and refract his beams through those crystals, and also have that area of effect attack, while Pop Fizz could lob potions, and especially with tracking ones, that I think would be beneficial. But yeah, for even Pop Fizz to have to now dodge basically Prism Break's crystal shards and his beams that are going everywhere, that might be a bit of a tough go of it, while he's also trying to deal with Aurora.
Yeah, so I'm really thinking that you and I are going to have to team up here. The Pop Fizz and Prism Break are going to have to team up. Pop Fizz is going to be trying to do some more of the long range. Prism Break trying to do a bit more of the, like using those beams, trying to use those to your advantage, while also, if Aurora gets in a little too close, using that area of effect. But yeah, I do think that more than likely, with our combined attack stats, we probably can get Aurora relatively down in health pretty quickly. But as for how much damage is going to be dealt to us, and just kind of comparing like our stats as well, like they are relatively fairly even, except I don't have a tertiary attack, and I also have lower health by a bit as well. So I do think that more than likely there's a good chance that if we're able to take Solar Flare Aurora out, you might end up being the one who's then able to like deal the last couple points of damage to me and be able to take me out.
Yeah, that's honestly what seems like it'd be likely. And all it would take for Aurora is to just close in with any one of us, and I think we're hooped at that point.
And I do think that's a really strong possibility, considering the speed and agility that Aurora's attacks have. It is a really good possibility that Aurora's just going to be able to dive in and take out Prism Break or Pop Fizz in just a couple hits. And then after that, it's going to be like a good fight for Aurora. So I do think so long as we are managing to keep our distance and managing to get all of our attacks to land, which, considering that both Prism Break and Pop Fizz have a decent amount of area of effect of attacks depending on what strategy we're using, I do believe that more than likely we could take Solar Flare Aurora out first, but I still think that there's still a really good possibility that Aurora could still end up getting the upper hand on one of us. It really seems like there could be like a almost 50-50 kind of matchup here, where like potentially like Solar Flare Aurora could take it 50% of the time, and then the amount of times that we're able to take Solar Flare Aurora out looks like it might go to Prism Break.
Now, from my perspective on this whole thing, I am noting that Solar Flare Aurora has a lower HP total than either of her adversaries at this point, but every other stat is superior. However, I don't think that luck and armor are going to factor in nearly as much as they would in any other matchup. My strategy is actually, it would actually vary, and it would develop the more we go at it. But initially, I'm having trouble deciding which of the two of you would be more efficient to deal with first. In that Pop Fizz has some really, really annoying potions, but Prism Break also has those beams. Defeating one of you over the other doesn't seem like it's going to be more beneficial in this case. So I'm not sure how I would decide which one, but my go-to strategy to begin with would be I'm obviously taking the bottom path. I'm taking the path of fastest Skylander alive, because mobility is my ally here. And I would immediately try and close the gap and lay down a light sword to slow your movement and your attacks. That would be a priority 1, because that gives me a little more breathing room, at least for 2 or 3 seconds before it explodes, dealing 98 points of damage to you both, if I do it right. That gives me a couple of seconds to basically breathe, while not having to worry quite as much about incoming potion bottles or laser beams, because it's taking you longer to fire those off. From there, not stand in the middle in between you two. I would dodge around, using that dash, probably dash through one of you, turn around, and immediately lay on those sword attacks, because those 49 points of damage, those are going to come in very, very rapidly. And if it looks like I'm about to get in hot water, like if I see Pop Fizz switch his potion bottle, or if I see a crystal get laid down that could potentially bounce a beam towards me, I lay on the dash attack to get out of there as well, potentially through one of you. And I think actually I would try to take out Pop Fizz first, because if I put Pop Fizz between myself and Prism Break, there is a good chance that those prismatic lasers are also going to hit and damage Pop Fizz. So he goes down even quicker, and then Prism Break on his own, I feel like, would be, from there, Prism Break, it'd be all too easy to just, outspeed, drop some more swords to slow down further, and just cut him down.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of convinced me that it's probably not a 50-50 there.
Yeah, it's more looking like maybe an 80-20.
Yeah, maybe about that, yeah.
I could see the combination of the two of you taking me down a couple times out of 10. Not every scenario is going to play out perfectly for any of us. I could definitely see Aurora losing a few matches. Definitely. But it's not even close in my mind to 50-50. I would say 80-20 is about right. And then I would agree with Inklander's sentiment of, in the instances that you do take down Solar Flare Aurora, there are 0 out of 10 instances where Pop Fizz wins.
Yeah, I think it's really due to that area of effect attack that Prism Break has, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate for a team up that attack does not discriminate
Yeah,
against who it affects.
Crystal Eruption is, pretty deadly.
There's that, and then there's the fact that Pop Fizz is a lobber. Pop Fizz has some good attacks, but they don't work if you can't hit.
That's fair, and we know that lobbing does not work in Skylanders very well.
It definitely has its issues, which gives Prism Break even more edge over Pop Fizz in this case. But I can definitely say with confidence that Solar Flare Aurora would take this easily 8 times out of 10.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So for this Archean Arena match, I am declaring the winner to be Solar Flare Aurora with a whopping 8 wins out of 10.
Congratulations.
Before I toss it over to Chill Bill to end us out, I just want to give a special shout out to Inklander for returning to pass the torch. It's been an absolute pleasure having you as my co-host in the past and having you as a guest star today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to come back and be able to pass the torch over to Trioxen here. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you all have planned for the rest of the season, and who knows, maybe I will guest star again sometime in the future.
Yeah, I really hope to have you back, and thank you for bringing me onto the show and passing the torch. This is an honor for me.
And on that note, take it away, Chill Bill.
That concludes this episode of Skylanders Portal Casters. You'll find the website and links to the hosts' individual channels in the description, including their wonderful guests. Follow the Skylanders Portal Casters Twitter for regular updates about this podcast, and join Discord server for Skylanders discussion. Until next time, this is Chill Bill with K-Troll signing off.
I can feel fairly satisfied with that.
Yeah, you managed to effectively tank him. That's for sure.
Hooray!
Inklander came in and was like, "Nope,
Not
I'm
happening
gonna take
today.
him down."
Gotta squash that bug, huh?
Yes, exactly.